all of you for the lecture. So this lecture series is being organized by Tamil Nadu and particularly the group of Tamil Nadu. I don't need to introduce Tamil Nadu for again. It's a voluntary science movement, people science movement. It was started in 1980 by two researchers. So now two of them are here. They are the founder members of this association, and they started initially doing all lectures in the halls, and later they go to the people and they started doing popularizing the science and it has grown to their Tamil Nadu. So we are functioning in 6 different verticals. So one of them is science communication. So we fall under the group, science communication. Other group is health and gender. So the second group, the gender, we have a separate group called Samam. And the health and gender is under one subgroup, and we have another group called development and environment. And the fourth group is science propagation. We are publishing a couple of science magazines apart from the publishing group in science. And the fifth group is education. So we are working with some 6 different verticals. I invite all of you to join Tamil Nadu Science Forum and be part of that and take forward to popularizing science. So this lecture is going to be delivered by Dr. Kalaiyarasan. We have a short introduction about Kalaiyarasan. So Dr. Kalaiyarasan is an assistant professor in Madras studying in Chennai. And he is visiting research fellow of King's College in London. He was a Fulbright postdoctoral fellow and visiting assistant professor in Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. He was previously with the National Institute of Labor Economics, Research and Development, research wing of NITI Aayog. It was renamed as NITI. Formerly it was the Planning Commission. His academic interest lies in the social inequality and comparative economic problems. So in this lecture, I think we have advised that we should deal with what's going on in India and try to connect with the work done by Goldin. Thanks.
Jen, Professor Meena, Professor Barani, good evening to everybody, and it gives me indeed much pleasure to be here. In fact, I'm privileged in many ways to speak on my cooking is right. Looks like a cooking. So certainly a privilege to be speaking on economics in a mathematical institution. And I'm not going to show much equations, not even any equations, so to say. It's more of so yeah, it's going to be very difficult in that sense of summarizing somebody's 40 years work in 45 minutes and also connecting that work and trying to draw lessons from that work and understanding India's story through that, analysis. But still, I try my best to Excuse me. Hello. So this, as I mentioned, it's going to be difficult, but still I'm my best to link up our analysis in the of the US case with the India story. And these are broad works of Professor Claudia Goldin, Nobel Prize for Economics 2023. And the Nobel Prize is given to her for having advanced our understanding of women's labor market outcomes. I must say here, of course, our work actually spans for 40 years, and I think if you read the Nobel Committee's summary of our work, which is roughly runs in 40 pages, and most of those citations, if you find the citation comes from the first book, which is the gender gap, which happened to read this book and also look at read the text of the Nobel Committee, and largely comes from this book, the first book, which was published in the 90s. And of course, there's a series of articles and which later books, and which largely I would say talks about the American history, and mostly maps like 50 years of American economic history, and looking at women question in the labor market, in broader economic question, and particularly in the labor market. And why it is also, I guess, my understanding of awards, and also to read the literature, and also the responses to this award by economists. There's also kind of, I would say, not a politics, is some kind of subtext also emerges from this conversation. You see, there's also what you call politics of citation, or what is who considered to be an economist as a best economist, as a someone brilliant, whatever that the terms that we use, is also being questioned by many women professionals, particularly women economists, in the sense not been appreciated of their work. One example is, this is, I think it's recently came out in an article in New York Times, where even if you cite, as I'm sure pretty much case in the STEM also of the underrepresentation movement, and there's so much in the economic discipline, definitely. And even if you work, your work hardly get, or it probably get cited lesser than the men in that sense. For example, near the joint article which she worked with own husband, Lawrence Scott. He's a professor and again Harvard. And most of the time when people cite or even refer in the newspaper, it normally said it is Lawrence Scott's wife who worked with Claudia Goldin. So similarly, you will also find with stories here, another Nobel Prize winner, Angus Deaton, and he has recently written a book which got a Nobel Prize for working again on India. And similarly, his work was also, in fact, first author was his wife, and generally it's seen as a first, put the woman men name, and then follows the woman name. So this is it's considered to be this is an important thing we need to acknowledge, and I guess this also shapes our understanding of women in discipline like economics, and also STEM, and broader in large sense. So now, how that is relevant to us? This is relevant to us because we're going to talk about women in the broader labor market. I assume that even academic discipline also is another way of work in that sense. How the work is appreciated and how the gender works in that, in different aspects of it. Now, what is specific or unique about Professor Goldin's method? I see, because again, there is a lot of debates around whether what she said is, what she has done is something remarkably new, or has been addressed or talked about by others in a different way. So, for instance, many Marxists or heterodox think that our work is more of mainstream, which is something feminists have been talking about the woman question in the labor market. What she said is, okay, of course it's true, but we have been talking about care economy, we have been talking about reproduction in a different way, but just that she formalized or made it more a mainstream way, therefore that's one kind of thing. Second way, the mainstream thinks she's too heterodox in the sense, because probably no economist goes to the archives, very few actually, to combine the archival material with statistical data sets, or you run your regression or you run an econometrics, which is generally does not happen that way of most of the cases. Of course, heterodox guys works in that way, but mainstream combining operable material with econometrics exercise is rare and unique. I think that's the reason she could actually tell us a very comprehensive story of 250 years of American economic history with the human condition in that story. And through that, I also get another sense reading her work. When we think of empowerment, which are very political and sociological to suggest more of what empowerment means for women or any category for that matter. I think if reading her work, one can think of empowerment or freedom is not something as a destination, as a discrete variable, yes or no. You're empowered or not empowered. I think it looks like, if you read more closely, it looks like it is a kind of an horizon. You reach a point, then you suddenly find a new set of challenges, new set of problems. Then you reach another point, you see, it just goes on, not as a linear way, you reach a point that you are empowered. Because if you read our history, even initially with the labor market participation to wage gap to marriage market, the range of things you will find the different set of problem emerging at different point in time, context, space, all matters. So that means definitely not a destination. It is kind of one person. And according to again, she mentions it somewhere in the book. Also, there was no golden age for women in that sense. We all think there was a one point in time, there was a great things happening, suddenly things that go. And every point in time, there are different set of challenges. Maybe the challenges were different, today it's different, maybe the question was different earlier, today is different. That's a broadly certain theme, certain methodological issue that we get from our work. I think that shapes our uniqueness. I think that's remarkable in that sense, I would say. Now, key findings. What are the key findings? As I mentioned earlier, what was given to her or having an understanding of the labor market outcomes. That labor market outcomes, she actually did. Of course, the findings are relevant for the entire world, but it is essentially it's American story, American history. It is 250 years of American history, and actually, if you unpack that labor market outcomes, there are 4 key points that emerges from that outcomes and understanding. One is she makes, these are some technical, say U-shaped curve. Tell you what it means to U-shaped curve and go in detail one by one. According to her, there is a particular way of the participation takes place, which we economists call as a stylized facts. Stylized facts acquire its importance when you observe a pattern in history and acquire that as a ramification. You can with other contexts too. That's kind of you see that's a clear pattern. Just see for our work, mapping say 100-year history. There's a clearly of the women participation initially was high. What is the U-shaped curve? This is what U-shaped curve. Which, according to her, was high. At some point, the women participation was in a traditional, or you call as a backward society, when America was like more of a agrarian society, the women participation was high. Again, the women participation then would mean different thing in the sense that it's not really seen as a productive. For example, most of the women supporting in the family firms and the artisans and other things may not even seen as a productive work, but women actually was counted as working in that sense. So, which is very much the case, and historically, then it came down, and as the America industrialized, and the skills and the changes that all took place, and there are a range of ways that actually shifted the work of the both supply side and the demand side. And that really had a huge impact. There's clear decline. It was to the almost half of it. You can see clearly the picture. It was 60%, that it came down around less than 50% of the 1900, which is about after 100 years. From then it started going. Particularly, she calls as a kind of revolution. I'll come back to the latest story of by 60s things are really good, and which I kind of will discuss in detail. But the story is of finding is this supply and demand shapes the women participation, and that particularly you cannot simply say is a cultural story. It is also a story of the economic transition. As the economic moves from agriculture to industry to service, and the participation of women also changes according to that pattern, because the kind of skills required, that technologies that comes into all actually shape the woman outcomes. That's what it's called as a U-shaped curve. The second explanation, she says, of the woman return, particularly the woman participation when you look at the labor market, should not be seen in a homogeneous as a whole. You should also look at the different category heterogeneity with the participation. For example, different age group of women participate differently, and the married and unmarried will have a different life cycle, and that actually shapes your of the outcome, which she calls as the cohort effects. And the third aspect is again the earning outcomes. The earning outcomes, the gender gap, which is very much known in the literature, and you all know, right, for the similar jobs, there's a discrimination based on gender. But I think in the economic discipline, it has a long history of measuring this gender gap. Initially, it is called as a simply what you call prejudice, or the distaste, what's called as another economist called Gary Bakery calls as a discrimination for distaste. This is somebody I don't like, or a woman I don't like, the caste or the race, which is basically simply outcome of prejudice. But it also has another kind of way, which they call as a statistical discrimination, which is essentially in the sense, you link up with the productivity. What if I employ a certain person, whether his productivity is better than lower, then that actually is a difference. So there's an origin of this wage gap. There's a lot of contestation as to how do we explain this. Is it purely out and out discrimination? The long history. In that, she actually has really provided a very, very convincing story of the woman gender gap in the American context, and that we can certainly learn from the India story. Because as I would show, India say the gender gap, you can clearly see why that is relevant to us. And again, she also finds this what the sociologists call the gendered work, or the certain occupation are considered to be good for women, certain occupation are considered to be men, and again the wage gap and the earning gap in those sectors. So these are 4 key findings. We'll go one by one and as to how does she explain, or how did she did or show the American case, and also what lessons that we can draw for India. U-shaped curve, as I mentioned, this is a change over a period of time, the historical changes in the economic history. Prejudice and discrimination, this is actually very important for the participation of women. This is a literature which I think very much connected to India also. What we call as status production, in the sense when your income increases of the household, men tend to believe in, this is actually the case in India too, and some literature suggests that if income increases, you from the supply side, that the men say the woman or the household says the woman need not to participate in the labor market. We have enough income, we don't want to our women to work. This actually was also the case in America, for certain cohorts, not for all cohorts, for all income structure groups. Then this is from the supply side. On the demand side, you also see the changes in the labor market, which I mentioned, the technology one level, and the morality, the schooling system, and the infrastructure, institutions, all that play of shaping that outcome of the what you call a falling rate. The initial period, as I said, the first 100 years from the 1790 to 1900, which is for 120 years. That's a data that shows why the decline is. And the explanation is partly of this economic shift in the structure, and also of the supply side of the moral and family structure, values, all that play, and that actually was largely shaped by what she calls the Victorian morality that existed at that point in time, which actually dictated what men should do, what women should do, whether should teach, not to teach, whether married, if the married woman should do, what the kind of very detailed rules of that. But again, as I must warn here, that is alone that alone did not shape the outcome. That is one aspect of what we call as a supply side. Then most important, which is again relevant to the India, which is there's a big debate among the feminist economics in India, not counting work. If you ask the feminist economics, they will say, no, it's not your rate is show, your women participation doesn't appear in the data, does not mean they are not working, they are working, you don't count them better. And you don't even define the work that you define may not actually catch or may not capture the work that women. So that debate was also there in the US too. And the statistical data was not capturing enough of the woman work, and that could be also partly reason why the decline. It shows the rate of decline of the woman participation. And actually, that is where our beauty of our method lies in. Where the statistical data are shown a certain rate of woman participation, she actually had a doubt on those and checked with the census data and looked at the gaply of the census columns, and she figured out many actually women are working. reported in the occupation column as a wife as a work, being as a work as a designated as a work, and which is essentially you are actually doing household job, which otherwise would have, if you convert that, monetize that, would have been effectively as a important work, what you do as a domestic productive production. Basically, all the goods that you do for at home, which if you monetize, would have been important component in that. She actually carefully went to the archival and looked at the census records and figured out, oh, the estimation that we have with the statistical data is not sufficient. I think there is something more. I think similar debates are taking place in India too, and there's a question that Indian statistical system is not capturing enough. Not only that, even the way that you conduct economic survey or the statistical survey, that also does not capture. There's a lot of debates around it. So this also partly of the not counting human work, so partly explains. And the third component, which I mentioned, that it's free movement, because the change in the technology that came in particularly the household sector, particularly the kind of technology that we are watching, all like grinder, mixie, the other household goods. Many of this technology actually freed women from the household stuff, allowed, provided enough time to think, or provided an option to think outside. So that way of the change in that technology and also connected to the income status, all that played what I would call as a free movement from the domestic duty in many ways, or care economy in many ways, allowed women to participate and exercise their choice of whether to participate in the market or not. But how much that decides the participation later, we'll discuss in detail, but this is a big picture I'm providing now. So this is the big story of the four important aspects. Now, how this improvement, as you go back to the original slides, this is, I explained, declared. Now, there's a rise in particularly in the 70s, you can see the 40s onwards picked up, and the 70s very clear, very steep up with that, you can find that. So why, how that took place? And she calls two important, which I think fascinating to think of. She calls this the power of guilt. By 80s, the scientific revolution took place in the medical science, then pill was introduced, and that made a remarkable change with the age of marriage and fertility and the choice that you make, whether you want to study, you want to get married, you want to work. That option was provided to men, to women, in that sense of having this pill. This tiny pills they call as a power of important change that we see in the labor market, which actually hardly normally doesn't appear to us, right? After one small tiny pill can change the entire labor market situation. That's how it happened in America. And that also partly, not exactly alone, that reason, but also contributed to women participation in the professional colleges and pathways of moving from college to or education institution to the labor market. So these two factors for her is what she calls as a great revolution or silent revolution that took place in 60s, and that remarkably changed the labor market for women in America, and it expanded choices and parenthood or earnings. Then she makes another important, which also I mentioned, partly repetitive here, which is any understanding if you want to have a woman in the labor market or discuss either participation or earnings or occupation, you should not see as one woman as homogeneous first. You need to look at what feminists call the intersectionality, which could be a range of factors, including class, caste, race, and age group or status, range of things. You need to look at all of that. And also you need to think of overall picture, in the sense not as a one-sided economic story alone. You should also bring in demographic variables, social norms, and others to think of or identify the pattern in the women participation. And also equally important, she said, which normally economists, mainstream economists don't give enough attention, is the institutional or the social mobilization issues. In the sense how, for instance, the law that came in 60s, for instance, in America, called Title 7, which is basically the protection of women from the discrimination, the protection of different communities from the discrimination. It made enormous changes, similarly minimum wages, if you think of, or the other institutional support or the protection to the women, which played an important role. And she actually factors all of this to see how the trend changes over a period of time when this intervention comes into the picture. So this is also very important, the institutional dynamics of the story. As I mentioned, this is very important because the Civil Rights Act, when was introduced in America, it was not gender was not the main story then. It was, of course, there was a feminist movement around in the 60s. Those who are familiar with the women would know that in the 60s was an important point in time called as a second phase of communism, right? And similarly, that is a point also you had a civil rights movement. So this both actually brought in a very institutional kind of structure, protecting women from the discrimination and a range of things. So that also played, and there is also a problem there in the sense, where many mainstream again, those who believe in the free market or free choice and liberalism started accusing the protection measures also. We need a protection. We wanted to be equal in the market. Sometimes the protection also can work against us. If you want to work more than a set of hours, or you want to be more flexible in that sense, there's also conflict. That's why any exercise, if you think of women participation in terms of earning, occupation, or outcome range of variables, we need to factor in what you call other aspects of the identity, because woman is not in a homogeneous sense, because there was a clear conflict between working woman versus with the professional woman, particularly with the set of this institutional measure that came in 60s, which she detailedly provides the richer analysis without getting into science, and as it is to it's a very, very risky and very tough job of providing those accounts. So that actually definitely worked. So now this is the broad story. As I mentioned, it's a 200-year story of how things have changed for women participation in the labor market, from the supply side, demand side, and the scientific changes, technology, and the institutions. Now, how this is important for the global? America is a developed world. It's today, if you look at its economic structure, it's oddly per capita income is 10 times more in most of the cases. And I think in particular countries, if looking at which position, if you look at, you will see that, but it's definitely one of the developed world in that sense, if you want to control the other European countries. So then how much that work is given to that case study, based on case study of that country or that context is given to the global. But feminist economics, and broadly there is an agreement. Definitely there are certain patterns that we can learn for other countries too, particularly how the technological changes, the skill base, how it changes participation, industrialization. This is a big story among the structural transformation. It's in India, whether last 40 years of the structural transformation is the reason for decline of women participation in the labor market. Because as I'm going to show in the next few slides, that women participation in India is abysmally poor. So this is a huge debate among economists as to say why this is taking place. Is it because the way in which our economy is changing? Is that the reason that we see this decline? That's a question. So this is actually, she also mapped in the America case of the agrarian industrialization that very much is relevant to other countries. And the technological change and the gender norms. Again, the gender norms that we say, gender or social norms, social stigma, some of this actually we see the subjective aspect of social, cultural aspects, may not operate the same way that it operates in the US. It has its own dynamics, its own, it may culturally would differ, but it has a certain universal characteristic to it. But it may operate different way in a different context. That's something we can learn from. And educational opportunities. One of the things that India is too of the decline of women participation is a large number of young, particularly age of women entering into the professional colleges. How that actually helps or stifles the women participation again is the question. So some of these institutional aspects relevant. So now, where does India stand in this? Is it? I provided answer immediately. So India is actually the position. If you look at it's not a teleological or linear way of telling. India's position exactly. If you follow the participation rate, what America was in 1900. It's 123 years. But when I say this, I must make a caveat here. I don't mean that we will take another 100 years to reach there. No, does not follow that. It only simply means statistically, if you look at the trend, follow this of the where the America stands in 1900, it's roughly around 23. Yeah, roughly around 23-24%. Is exactly the position if you look at today's India's position. Before this, if you go further, there's an argument, the economists actually brought out a series of articles to show why India is very poor in employing or allowing participation in the market. And some statistics shows that 7% of urban Indian women have paid jobs. So that this generated a lot of debate. There's a contestation. It's not a cultural problem. There are other problems in the structure. So the range of explanations. Now, let's go one by one the statistics. The statistics show we don't know whether exactly we're going to follow the U-shaped curve because we have another problem here. We don't have statistics of this. Yes, I've not come across any economists working with the 100-year data of the human participation. Even the census with the statistical survey data, I'm not sure it has been combined. The data available so far economists have been using, government and both non-governmental economists using is the survey-based data sets. It comes in the NSSO. It's largely from 1970s onwards, which allows us to go in nuts and bolts, like very what economists call unit level data, which you can download the data and do the very detailed analysis, rich analysis. That data available only from. So from there, if you follow 40 years, it was actually the stagnant or maybe partially increasing since the 90s until 2004. You see the bottom two curves, which is urban and rural for women. There's a drastic decline from 40 to 20% roughly. Can you imagine in a country where 4/5 of women, like it's not out of every 5 women, 4 women are outside of the labor. Just where are they? If you're not in the labor market, what are you doing? Is it in the education or in the household or in domestic duty? What kind of job? So this generated huge debate among the economists. How can this be possible? If you control the across countries with the per capita income, again India seems to be at the one of the bottom in that sense. Even if you control, because the one explanation was because I want to bring your attention to the first slides that I have shown, the U-shaped curve, because we think that economic structural change, levels of income would decide the degree of participation of women. But even if you control that, these are data, actually, I must say here the citation, largely some of this is my data, some of them largely I dropped from Asim Premji Economic Foundation. They have a very thorough report on women participation in labor. So most of the statistics that I'm going to show here on India, I largely dropped from their analysis. So this is the controlling of the per capita income across the globe. India stands out at the top. So this has actually generated huge debate among the economists as to how do we explain this. And Claudia Goldin, if you follow, I think there's some reading of the particular technological change, economic structural, that all falls in exactly, but we don't know that we need to, India also has to go through the exact same way what America did for like 2 years. Need not go. But there is something to learn from that, how the economic shift, the structural change, technological shift can impact women participation in the labor market. So this, when I mentioned here in India's case, is more complicated when you want to do this kind of analysis because even its diversity based on the regions. And see here again, you will find huge differences among the regions, particularly of the participation rate much higher. I mean, it's definitely lower per capita income if you compare the global standard, but definitely much better in the southern states and the western states. That you can clearly see in the map. And particularly Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and certain states stand out in this. But again, when I say it's a relative sense, the southern states. But if you control the per capita income, measure them at the global level, but they are still poor in that sense of participation. So we'll have to be mindful when we do any analysis on earning outcomes, occupation, all of this needs to be qualified with the regions, of the other aspects. But for the intersectionality, if you want to use the other terms, sociological terms, we need to factor in all of this. And even if you think of the hired woman working as a practice system, and you see the clearly map, it's largely in the southern part of the partly west, it's largely in the southern part. Now, this also again, as I mentioned, women should not be seen just not a region; it also should be seen with other social identities. And clearly, there's a caste also plays out. There's a certain caste, particularly of the lower end, participate much higher because by sheer necessity, you have no option that you need to follow. And that actually partly responsible. Because here I need to also make one more inference that we can draw from Professor Goldin's work, which actually she mapped out the slavery impact of the black woman in the American case. When she was actually doing that, I don't have the data to show because the kind of curve she made a longer time period, like almost 200 years period. You clearly see the black woman participation is much higher. It's again necessity, right? You are actually at least until point of slavery, then Jim Crow, then comes the post-60s. Even if you do all of this, you see the across time, this is much higher participation of the black woman. But in some context, actually came down because when the discrimination or the Jim Crow, which is another institutional as a norm, you call it. It's a metaphor for a norm to exclusion of black African American from the public life. It was a huge, very, very brutal institution. That brutal institution excluded black women participating in the labor market when the slavery was ended. So at that point, she actually shows how that institutional change impacted the participation of the labor market. So when we do, why I'm making that claim? So we need to be, similarly, we have the institution, the other social institution in India, caste and other ways, religion, that need to be factored in if you really want to understand women participation. So because there's a clear divide based on this in the participation. Now we show women occupation, where do women work in India? Again, you see clearly the what we call gendered pattern in the occupation. It's a broad indicator. Again, it does not provide very minute occupations of the occupation in the sense of the whether the clerk or the professionals or the regular, but here it's broadly called as a sectoral. The sense whether they are working in agriculture, whether they're working in manufacturing or advanced services or the traditional services, that medium, it's a sector, not really an occupation. So if again there's a clearly gendered pattern here. You see clearly on the right hand side, most of the women are working in the still tied with agriculture, low productive activities. The participation very less in the modern services and the manufacturing, at which you can compare with on the left hand side is the manufacturing. So this also has an implication, because when the shift takes place, why this is important? When the shift takes place from agriculture to non-agriculture, or from the home-based industry, weaving or artisan, or the agriculture to the production-based, factory-based industries, so women have to first step out of the home to participate, and then you need to have a certain degree of education to participate, and you need a certain degree of institutional structure to protect or security, all that security in the sense given your social norms, all that, and also infrastructure of the mobility, all that plays out in the participation, not just ensuring the jobs, whether at the destination, whether in the industry or service sector, all that. This entire the infrastructure too matters, because that's what she shows when America moved from agrarian to industry or the service, how the technological changes and the infrastructure actually played a role in that movement, the mobility. So that definitely is applicable to India too, but it need not to happen the same way, need not to happen that many years that America had undergone, like 250 years. Not, but still certain characteristic pattern that emerges in America is still relevant to India. Now, second aspect is we have been super talking about the participation. Second aspect, even if you participate, you have this gender gap. In our analysis in America's case, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the gender gap, which is basically is a differential pay or a differential wages for the given jobs. Is it occupational differences because women are concentrated low-paying jobs, or the men are concentrated high-paying jobs, or for identical jobs you get a differential? It could be both. What they call as an occupational discrimination or a wage discrimination. But if you look at historically, there's a social norm, accepted social norm. The men are supposed to be good to fit in a certain job. Therefore, even for identical jobs, just simply by prejudice and discrimination, given higher pay. But later in economic thinking, which actually she maps clearly, what they call statistical discrimination. In the sense you control, in the sense you control education, you control your occupation, you control number of years of experience. That show whether how much this difference that we find in aggregate terms of the men-women wages explained by the range of factors, and the residual you call, which is not being explained by any of these factors, you call it as a discrimination. Or that again needs to be. So this we need to be careful as to when we use a discrimination, whether it's by just prejudice or simply the characteristic that we say all of this. But still the gap persists in India too, and the gap is much higher at the lower end, at the middle level, but in certain occupation is even much higher. For instance, self-employed, here is the three columns that you have: regular, casual, and self. The woman reported as self-employed and men in both contexts is much lower than the wage gap in casual labor, and even the wage gap in the regular jobs. So there, we need to again, this needs to be unpacked, go into the detail, very granular level of the different sectors, whether it is in the apparel, whether it is the textile, whether it is IT, or what kind of jobs. All of that needs to be factored. I'm just only providing you an aggregate picture of the over a period of time. This is the decile. So different scale. The income category of the earning category of the different levels of the income, which sector, the lower and the middle is much level of discrimination, not discrimination, I won't call it discrimination, gap, gender gap, which could be outcome of range of explanatory factors. Until you prove that, we can't get economics, don't do that. So that's definitely there's a gap, wage gap there. So now the another thing is, here is the, as I mentioned, this could be simply of the wage gap could be simply of occupational differences, because women are concentrated, are pushed to concentrate on certain occupations. Men are pushed to concentrate on certain occupations, are pushed or privileged to or enjoy that historical inherited privilege that had that, that could also be simply in the aggregate data show as a wage difference, which is simply the occupational differences, but which actually shows in the data that there is definitely a gendered pattern of the low paying and high paying jobs that gets as a wage gap in the data sets. And most interesting is this, which is the employability of women, and which is actually what we would call as a status production opportunity cost. This is actually very fascinating for me also to learn this, and which is very much important in Goldin case. Actually, she really had shown how this operated in America's case. So, which is, I just take a two more minutes to explain this in detail. The first one, rural, what the figure simply says is, as income or the income, or you call as an income increases of the persons, the monthly earning of the husband's earning, whether the husband earnings decide the wife's participation in the labor market. That's a question. If you ask the question, whether the husband earning dictates or decides or shapes the wife's participation in the labor market. In the rural area, definitely as income goes up, woman withdraws from the labor market. But the variance is high. I mean, when you say that the width is high, it's because there's an ambiguity there, but still it is overall point, you see the decline. On the right hand side, it is a case with the middle class men or middle class family, which actually what you call a status production, but not applicable to the upper end of the income. That it could be not really driven by the social norm, social or called what social is called status production, is called status production. I would think of economics reading of the rate of return in the sense, if you are earning enough to hire the maid and other aspects of the household care, if you get your return is much higher in the labor market, I think that might be the simple economic logic. If you exclude the social protection or the social status or the status production logic, I think that could be operating in the urban India. We need to go unpack as to more with the granular data, but in aggregate level, there is a clear correlation between this status production versus the urban income. Again, stepping out, as I mentioned, one of the reasons the decline is attributed in India is also partly the change. Agriculture has declined, the industry has come up. How much the ability to move, step out, or the mobility part plays an important role. And here, the percentage of women step out home for work is again, you see, this is a function of the status, function of social norms, function of infrastructure, sheer infrastructure, availability of transport, that also plays a role. And clearly see the clear variation in India across states. You can see, typically you will find the border states are largely from southern states, which have more mobility of the women stepping out from home to work. And both in this case, in the urban is more actually, which is not the case in the most of the northern states, which is very serious stuff. In fact, not just ensuring job alone matters. The demand side, you need to also supply side at the home, change the situation at home, but also infrastructure equally matters. So that is the reason one would think of why the public transport, because the public transport matters because women use public transport more than men in India. It's from the census data. So all of this plays out explaining the changes in the labor market. Now, this is the most interesting story. This is actually the statistical again. So there's a connection to it's sheerly it's a data correlation and generated a lot of debate. In the sense, it's called as a mother-in-law effect for women participation in the labor market, which is typically mentioned in India. In a household where if mother-in-law happen to be working, the woman actually works in that household. So is it empowering story because of the already one woman is working and that inspires the other woman who enters in the household also to work? But it's more case in the urban case. It's clearly statistically significant. So which the economists call as the mother-in-law effect. The mother-in-law happen to be working, and the probability that woman in our household also get to work comes as a daughter-in-law in that family. So which is again the fascinating story of the India's case. This is also going, work, for example, I'm employed. No, okay. So unless I define work as a household, I work and mean employing outside, either in a factory or in farm or in office. That's what when I mean work, I mean that. Unless I specifically mentioned work here as a doing other than monitor, other than professional. When I mean work, I mean job, going and working. Of course, everybody works at household, and woman works more in the household of domestic, which I'm not talking. I'm talking as a work as an activity, economic activity outside. Yeah, it could be farm, artisan, weaving, etc. That could also be partly, but here is a more case explicitly stepping out. So it is partly the function of the status, norms, all that actually is that's a question that I'm trying to make here. So this is the broad trend with the story of human participation in the labor market with respect to participation, earnings, and the occupation, the mobility, etc. But how does the India's policy or the institution respond to this question? Is it protective? Is it a pro-woman historically? How the India's institutions have been addressing this question? Which is again, this is a domain of feminist historian domain, but I draw some lessons from the literature, which is again very interesting. And as per the report goes, it's a recent document, is a book, as collection of women reader. And if you follow that book, you see till 70s there was no conversation on the women labor or women participation in the labor market, which was actually not even in the imagination. Of course, there was an historically participation, the freedom movement, etc. All that. That's one part. But when it comes to the economic question, it was not in the discussion until 70s when the International Women Years, there was a committee formed addressing this question. Until then, it was not a question at all. It was not an issue at all, which is something very interesting. Because if you look at the America's history, I did not show here. There was a lot of reports, not just the 60s and 1890 onwards, of the women participation, concerns of the working woman, range of aspects. But India too had a longer history, richer history. But with respect to participation in the labor market, work and condition of work and the wages and that kind of question emerged as a vocabulary, as an important question in the history, if you see only in the 70s. And even some of the planners of the planning commission earlier, because if you think of the economic history of India till 90s, it was a planning period, right? Called as from 50s to 90s. The 90s is the economic liberalization, as a call as a market-driven economic policy. But the planning actually was seen as not economic. They're not seen as a participation of the development. It's in the beneficiary of the development. You are something of the outcome. There's a economic development happening. You are just going to be beneficiary. You're not being the agents of that. That's what the critique was. None of this actually the words of mine. It's all from the feminist historians that I mentioned here, the Bina Majumdar, the Swaminathan, the range of people. I'm just mentioning very few here. They have recorded, documented in multiple writings, etc. And clearly shown. But there's a change since 90s when the market or the economic liberalization took place and the changes in the education structure, participation in IT, all that changed. This is the first figure. Is again citation is from Nikhil Menon's book on the planning and democracy, where it shows this is the Maharomi's office. Maharomi is one of the founding members of the India's statistical system. In his office, the woman was seen as a Kalyan, his wife actually taking care of certain aspects, which is considered to be of the embroidery, certain stuff which are supposed to be woman friendly, embroidery and sewing machines, etc. Whereas men's job is supposed to be planning, national planning, industry, heavy industry kind of stuff. So you clearly see that kind of gender pattern that was there in the entire planning in some sense, but still the 70s at least I could see from the data. And this is changed actually post 90s. Of course, there's an active woman as an active agent of making the choices. And that actually became a very important thing since 90s. So in conclusion, broadly, if you see, this is not just what Claudia Goldin draw as a map of the American history for 250 years. It's not just applicable to America. Definitely, there's a different history, different cultural, different sociological structure, but definitely has a lot of ramification for India's case. And it influences many ways that helps us to understand the work and earnings and occupations. And as I mentioned, it is not women empowerment or question is not simply a discrete variable. It has to be horizontal. It changes as a structure evolves. And again, there are certain universal economic laws. Again, this is questioned by historians who say there is no universal, but I do believe, inferring from our work, there are certain characteristics that are universal in pattern, which need not to operate, get expressed in the same way in every context, but does as a implications. That's what, for example, the four things that I mentioned earlier of the U-shaped curve. At least if you don't, the U-shaped curve does not follow exactly in India's case, but the inference, the structural change that takes place in India, in the economic structure, basically from agrarian to industry to service, and the technological change shapes the demand side of the participation, and the education institution, and the change in the household, and the power of pill I mentioned, that the pregnancy will play a huge role of the choices that provided to women with respect to marriage, fertility, and etc. There's tons of exercise to connect the fertility rate and marriage with the participation choices in the labor market. So one can make the connection. That connection, of course, it is in America's case that she provided, but very much relevant to think of in India or any context for that matter of the women choices in the labor market. Then the real equality, again, it is, definitely the institution, all that matters, the group matters, but definitely individual as a person who has an agency to decide, determine the choices, even understand, make their own choices, informed choices, plays important role. But that role is not just simply done by economic analysis alone. It definitely has a political legislation and institution, which I mentioned, Title 17 in America's case. And the India's case, I don't know, I'm sure you would all know the Visaga judgment came in late 90s and latest now, I guess, is much advanced level. So they all played an important role of certain workplace conditions. There are other laws in the institution, all of that matters in explaining. So further research, of course, this why this is important, because she actually, as I mentioned in the initial slides, that she was an innovative or a novel methods in the sense combining historical archival with the statistical, which is becoming for any economist, because it's seen more of the technical aspect of the ethnographic way of looking at. She actually looked at more of the other aspects, other literature, other discipline, draw a lot of insights from those. So definitely that shape which matters if you really want to understand the complexity of the labor market, and allows more of the natural experience. For example, discrimination still is not fully established, because our own findings suggest still you have a occupational, the wage discrimination within occupation in America. And she uses that explanation, which is actually explained in one of the book, Career and Movement, is one book that I mentioned in the initial slides, which actually shows the discrimination in the wages. So which again connected to the, we'll have to explore that and identify and see the pattern, the channels and mechanisms of those discrimination, which again now economists can run the natural experiment to show and prove that. And the impact of parenthood again, which is skill, technology, all that plays, workplace structure. Most importantly, this should be seen as not as an isolation. Many of them, one of the things I would learn from this is to think of economics is should interact and relate, learn from the other disciplines. Then you get a more comprehensive, richer analysis, understanding of the world and around us and about us. Thank you. Yeah.
You compare the black women being more in the labor participation with the caste system of India. And you said that the women from the suppressed caste are more in the job market. That is because of their need. But here the need is economic. And how comparing a former Indian feudal system to the transatlantic slave trade, which is offspring of the capitalist system when it was getting birth. So that is one question. There's another point to mark that with the household income increases, when the man is able to get more salary, the women, labor participation lowers. But how is that not because of social norm? Why is it not the men who opt out? Because there is no space for a women to say that, okay, you take care, I can take care of the family, you take care of the birth, and you take care of the family, and I take go out, I can take more of it. So that is more of a that there is a strong patriarchal layer over there. That part I disagree. And yeah, basically I forgot the other point. Yeah.
Pick up more questions. We'll pick up more questions.
Just wanted to any statements about US. There was a trend in countries like Soviet Union in same period you're talking about. There is some, and also what you may call the communist countries, Eastern Europe and other things. Do you have anything to say on those?
Any specific, if you, I mean, let's compare different countries.
In the post-Soviet blocks, after the dissolution of the Soviet government and dissolution of Eastern Bloc, particularly in Eastern Europe, there was a reduction in the women participation rate in the labor market. So we came on par with Western Europe, that is American, Western Europe. From Eastern Europe, we will clearly so, and post neoliberalism, there was a drop in the women participation. After the 2008 bubble, there was a drop in the women participation. And then we had some of the applications that is like this. So I see this as like capitalism and women emancipation, or I feel economics and women emancipation. That's what go on.
Yeah, sure, yeah, others.
I had a specific question on the slide on mother-in-law. So in the x-axis, I thought it was the probability of women to go to work, and there were some negative values. So if you could just clarify that. And also, I'm not very sure about the logic of this correlation. Like, it's not obvious to me, because if we are looking for inspiration, then why not do this correlation between like working mothers and daughters rather than mother-in-law?
This is someone has done this. I thought very exciting. Definitely we'll discuss that. Yeah, we'll go back.
I have a couple of questions. One is on your first slide. You said that you are the mainstream economics view as orthodox, and orthodox view her as a mainstream. So I got a comment from the mainstream economics. They viewed her as a heterodox, and they are classified as a feminist Marxist economist. That's the title that I read an article in that. They are completely disagreeing with the whole research she was doing. The first point, they are saying that the usual curve is, and the x-axis they take logarithmic. If you remove the logarithm, it becomes flat. It's not a U-shaped curve. That was the first trade. The second one, the pills. With regard to the pills, it is happening in the 70s. That they say that the 70s was witnessing high inflation. The high inflation drive every family member to go to the job. Obviously, it is a result of high inflation, not the inflation. That was the argument they have faced.
You mentioned about the everything, but I don't know if you mentioned about the long working hours. So that is a given expectation from the companies that they are profit driven. So for their profit, they are inducing competition among workers. That comes in form of who work more for less pay. And given the social circumstances, the work hours determine the amount of productivity. If I'm going to work more hours, I'm going to do more work. If I'm going to get less pay, I'm going to give more profit. So these two come hand in hand. I didn't see or I didn't notice any of that sort defined this, because working long hours is not something very easy for a woman in any society, because caregiving job is seen as a primarily women job in the whole of the world, not just India. So there becomes a block over there, where women wants to go for the job, which is going to be fixed. Everyone is going to work 8 hours. If that is going to be an ideal situation, we can see something moving forward. But that is not happening, right? And we are expecting everyone to work long hours, and the commute time is also usually in any urban city, it's like 1 hour to from work. That basically consumes around 12 hours of the day, roughly. So that's a very vital point. I didn't see it anywhere here.
Yes, very much.
Because most third world economies are, that is the first characteristic.
Yeah. No, we go round then, yeah. So we'll take the reverse order. So formal informal, definitely it plays a huge role, because again you have to see definitely will have a concentration, a government concentration on the informality both condition and informality very much connected. But I think one of the things we need to see of the informality with the traditional sector and the informality in the stepping out, that actually plays obviously the informality will tell us the marginality in terms of condition, wages, working hours, all that. But the participation whether declining, because even if you say countries like in Latin America, there are many similar characteristics if you look at the informality, but the participation is still higher of the countries recorded documented thing. So it is connected definitely of the marginality, condition, working condition, all that. But I'm not sure that alone explain the changes of particularly this is a remarkably lower of participation as shown in the things. Out of every 5 women, 4 women are outside of the labor market, which is purely like 23%, which is huge. And recent time it is a slight rise, which is again if you unpack that literature, I mean the last 3 years of the post-COVID, which is largely the self-employed category, and particularly the agriculture, which economists call as a distress-driven, because you are pushed out from the formal or the other employment that you used to have, and therefore you ended up supporting families and etc., which gets documented. So definitely that matters, but I'm not sure that alone would still explain but that would definitely explain the marginality system of the condition, wages, the stuff. Power of bill and the critique. See, I mean, if you look at even this is the book actually of which talks about the bill, the power of bill story. The first book is in the gap, and she gives a range of experts. It's not mono causality, like one reason alone. And how do you explain the participation increase, the women participation in the education institutions? It's almost changed 50%, more than 50% now of the education institution. I think she had shown a set of factors, vector of factors, not just one. This is an association or interconnected with the range of factors. It's not simply depression driven of what you call stagflation period. What is the period that you are saying? What the economics call stagflation, petrodollar and the crisis, all that happened, end of the colonial capitalism, beginning of deregulation, all that. But that alone, I don't think it's this is definitely a thing have changed in the of course de-recession took place as a globalization began. But I must say here, even if you uphold all of this, if you put all of this, even today, most of the focus north of the countries which is advanced or like the super capitalist in that sense, having better participation of women in the labor market. We cannot dispute that. It's a fact. Whether it's exploitative, working condition, all that is a different question. But if you take the labor market participation alone, it is still America is not no less than that. If you have those who travel in every sector, every domain, you will find from the drivers, every aspect, every occupation. I think that is something we need to acknowledge. But of course, how that happened, the wages differences, condition differences, all that we explained, debated and all that. But fact remains that it has achieved that way of remarkable. I mean, as I mentioned, the woman empowerment is not just a destination, a point that you see here in the future. So it's an origin. You reach here and you get a set of problems, following. I don't see, therefore, I'm not fully, of course, I don't know the experience of the Soviet Union enough to say what has happened inside of those working hours, which is connected to the other question of the Soviet Union and the communist countries. China story comes out, which is, I'm not sure, is clearly of the empowering story, so to say, if you want to unpack that story, some of the working conditions. We don't know all of those aspects. So at least here we get to know the data, you can question, criticize, make, but unless we get the data of the information of what's happening inside the working condition and the participation rates, all that in public domain, then we can discuss. So until that is available, I think it's very difficult to make of the one is better, other is thing. I mean, of course, there are important interventions done by the question of the 8 hours, mention the wages, all that. But beside that, there is no correlation to make that because the global north, particularly Europe or the America, is lesser in the. I mean, in fact, they have a higher participation, almost 50% of the workforce, almost closer to that. India, if you look at employment rate, it's abysmal, as I mentioned. Even controlling the your per capita income is India's score is very poor. The condition is very poor in that sense. So I don't know whether one can make that clear connection with that mother-in-law effect. Yes, very important. See, it is simply what it says is. I'll just show you that clearly of the. So what is the degree of the participation rural? The length of the, if you look at the vertical thing of the rectangle, the length of the rectangle is the mean. How much the probability that you get a woman getting employed, woman working, probability of woman working if the daughter, the mother-in-law is employed. Mother-in-law is already working. And the other is the small line is the variance, the degree of variance. Right? And it is more in the case of the urban. Basically, it only shows the status, the social norms restricting movement. It does not mean anything more than that we can read from this correlation or from this exercise. It just only see the norms allows or relaxed that household probability. But again, we need to control the income and other aspects to say make this time how much it matters. But with respect to the this is a status production. This is again fairly documented and statistically significant. Many economists show that in the rural area, it is definitely there is a degree of status production. In the sense, even in the field work in Tamil Nadu, in the Tirupur region, the another economic who I know personally, she's from Oxford, Judy Dyer, and she has an interesting paper, housewifeification. She calls as a which is basically when the men actually acquires a level of income, or even in the poorer household or the middle class household, there's a tendency to withdraw, asking women to withdraw from the thing. She calls it the term, as a so which is not, I'm not saying that alone as explained, but again, if because it does not explain the urban area, does not explain in the certain degree of household income household, because then I would say the economic logic is operating there. There's a care economy and there's enough income, or there enough people to take care of the household staff, or the technology allows you, or the income allows you to hire, and your return from the market, return from the working in offices or IT or any industry is much higher. Obviously, you would do the probability of working is much. I would say that's an economic logic operates within the cultural social norm in the certain household in the urban context. Maybe so that's why I'm making this. This is a claim that India's cultural norms alone responsible for women not working. It's not fully correct. There's a story there, but not fully explains the degree of problem here. That's there's also economic logic operating here, which is the demand side story. No, it is simply asking here household. It's any. We are not saying. What is that way we are doing anyway, so we can't we'll have to go into depth of this. So specific, yeah, that's right. I agree with you. Yeah. So it's basically a question is as I mentioned. I mean, this we have go to more of the nuts and bolts of how it operates in each context. Of course, you're right. It's a bad data, but other any questions? Yeah, race and caste. Yeah. Thank you. So, see, again, the race question is not simply comparing race with the caste, no, not including it. It only means even if you take the race identity of the woman as a race class. Even if you take the poor class factor, the woman who actually at the lower end actually has a higher participation rate. It is inversely proportional. So basically economic necessity. So the same way in the American case of the slavery, of course, the poor woman, black woman actually is economic necessity and also constrained by this has happened to work more. And it's pure economics. So there's definitely, if you want to call as an intersectionality, that's where the feminist reading comes in, connecting this two. And definitely that played a role. Not exactly to say it operates the same way that it's cost operating. But definitely there's a social plus economic work together, producing an outcome that we see in America. And also there is some kind of connection that one can make here as a caste, because here again caste also operates, does not operate in standalone. Always it operates with the other economic condition, other cultural, social condition. We have to connect all of that to make this claim. That's a claim that I was making. Not to make the both institutions are commensurable to each other. No, not at all. That's a different history. Different. Same way, even Professor Goldin's work itself is America history, given its technology, given its the economic structure. One may say that how can we draw lessons from that? No, it's India's structure, but still there are certain patterns which are comparable. So only in that sense I was comparing, not as a to say that it's exactly identical. We have exactly identical conditions. This slide. Yeah.
India.
Okay.
So there is quite mentioned, like I'm speaking about women's freedom of choice over marriages, remarriages, and other things. But this also comes up. So he marks widely that most of the currently existing OBC communities and scheduled castes and scheduled tribes practice widow remarriage, and divorce was a common practice. But somewhere around from 60s to 80s, the like this thing, remarriage and like remarriage and divorce, it became taboo, and there was an amount of work which need to rationalize and bring it back to an acceptance. Like I'm just asking, in between this, I'm just saying that there was a scope for the oppressed men to climb the social ladder. They were able to emancipate themselves through economical opportunities. They were able to get government jobs through various political movements which happened, political movements and reform movements which happened here in Tamil Nadu. And after that, the first thing which they did was that I see that when women get liberated from their oppression, I see that men suppress women because they have the economic stability and they become they come to the place where they can accept their masculinity. So I just found I have this observation, like how do you compare that?
I'm not getting we can discuss maybe in detail. Yeah, I'm not really getting. If you have any specific, I'm not getting the entire other aspects of culture. If you have any specific, you can come.
With regard to India, are there any analysis where lower caste women with educational opportunities, is there like with that kind of intervention, is there increase in?
Yeah, that's okay. Very much. Yeah, definitely. See, we need to see that's as I mentioned, women participation in the totality, aggregate participation in the labor market. If you say let's say the slides, if you want to see that. Yeah, you can clearly see the participation rate itself differs. And again, this needs to be controlled with what you say, the education, if you want to get this aggregate. If you can control the different education pattern, you will clearly see the patterns, which economists call as again an U-shaped, what U-shaped in the sense, lower illiterate would have more participation, and the secondary education comes down. It comes down for the middle and secondary education. Then, if you have more education, higher education, the graduate and above goes down. But now there's a claim it's a flattening. But that would actually work for the customer too. If education and class identity works, and education is definitely possible. Even today, it is if you are a graduate, this probability is high, no doubt about it, compared to the then definitely there's an action. And which actually, again, the question is that, as I mentioned, it should not be seen in a one as a homogeneous category. We need to control the social identity plus region plus age plus education, all of this, even the income. I'm not sure that, because the job was not to show you the complete only I took only those aspects which are directly connected, that we can talk to relate to our work, the Professor Goldin's work. So that way, even in income there is a connection. Income of households and the women participation, there is a connection there. Definitely, all of this matters. No doubt.
But the other thing is that partly a comment. There's a book called Caste, the origins of our So how does Goldin see in her explanation or in her theory, one of the books, how does she see that?
See, I don't know there's any conversation on those between, because the Isabel Wickerson book came in 2020, recent book. And the award or the Goldin works is 1990 when she was talking about. I don't think there's any. I don't think even Goldin saw this. She would have seen this and appreciated it. Right? But there was an account in our work on, because the racial literature in America is very rich. One of the things in America we need to say, appreciate is it's well developed. Even if you go, I visited some places in the museums. If you go, you'll have a granular level data of the each household. You can some of the even the slavery, also the plantations, the number of people who work, whose relatives. You can, because as I mentioned, you have been another book of Isabel Wickerson book, The Great Migration. She actually mapped thousands of families who actually migrated from the global south, the deep south, which the slavery was to the north, and how that life actually of what it means to be a migrant from one to the other in the different culture, particularly after the immediate after slavery. That why she could also again the archival the material available. At first we don't have that kind of richer data. Therefore, that's at one level, but I'm not sure there's any connection immediate to make. But Professor Goldin accounts the racial question within the explanation factors. Clearly, there's in each of the graph you will find white and non-white women. Non-white at the point in time probably
follow comment. Michelle Obama writes the topic. She has the same thing, right? It still opens up opportunity. Graduates even 1 in 90 days, the last of the IEs to allow to graduate.
Yeah.
And she has a very bad situation when she graduates.
For the woman, for African woman, are you asking?
So American women, also being one of the first few classes of female graduates from the it follows the same trajectory. The book, in fact, she's so angry, like what to say, she's angry that she's never mentioned the campus after graduation.
No, I mean, in terms of the being woman or the being a black, after the color identity of color identity. Yeah, no doubt. Now that the war, the campus become battle of all that everything is. See, I am not saying when I say the data, there are two things I'm saying. When I say the freedom, when I say the choices, when I say the working conditions, those are contestable. When I say this as an economist, looking at the numbers and looking at some of the statistics, when I said that there are some of the statistics. For example, redlining. I don't know whether you're familiar with this. There's a clear segregation of the loans and things. Clearly, you can map now and go in available, which are documentation. That only I was mentioning that, and Isabel Wickerson mentioned in that. Of course, the richest, it's very tough. It's a brutal history. Let's put this way: brutal history of America. So that does not take away us of the concern that the question that we are today discussing. It's not to say that's give any other claim to that country. Only it's a context. Someone has mapped it, and we are drawing lessons from that context. What we can learn. That's nothing beyond that.
I have a question here.
Please, please.
So I might have actually misunderstood you. Made a comment about the cultural background media not really being that having that much of an impact on the situation. But from what I not anything read, but from my own experience, girls are brought up not able to think about growing up and taking up a job once they finish education, right? They're grown up or brought up thinking that they should just marry someone. Even the education is geared towards finding the right room for the woman, right? So it's not just the parenthood effect, it starts much earlier. So I'm a little surprised.
No, I should make myself clear. Thanks actually raising this question. That allows me to explain. So when I mentioned culture, I have to be very qualified. I have to make a very qualified statement. I did not mean the cultural, social does not matter here in terms of human freedom, choices, and education. All matters in every childhood. Like the way socialization is gendered socialization. Absolutely no contestation to it. I completely agree with you. Only aspect that I wanted to say here, with respect to women participation in the labor market, is not just because they're culturally prevented working, which is case in the slide that I'm showing, which is a case in the rural India. There is definitely this is a cultural angle. Status, when I mean the status production, it's a cultural angle. Why would the woman, when the men income increases, you should withdraw, ask women to the job, which is definitely the gendered cultural thing. I am not discounting, but the degree at which our participation is less. Kind of 4/5 of women is not participating in the labor market. Whether the entire explanation would be attributable to culture is the question. There are other factors, particularly our economic structure, why we are not able to provide and generate enough employment, why we are not able to generate and provide infrastructure, why we are not able to range of factors facilitating women participation, mobility, etc., are to be equally accountable, explaining the lower rate of participation. Not to say that culture matters in connection with all of us. But otherwise, what happens is ends up as an explanatory, then becomes very reductive explanation as to we need to unpack that to show how that operates in connection with all of us factors. That's the only, not to say definitely it matters. As I mentioned, the slides that I'm seeing, this is the exact slides on the left hand side is the status production. It's exactly what you are mentioning of the labor market. Of course, it works in the childhood, it works in education structure, all that definitely, no doubt. Thank you actually for asking this question.
Maybe the population has a lot of population also may be a factor because a lot of hands are there, but opportunities are not there. In Western countries, there is a lack of hands, so everybody has to work. So that also may be contributed. So here also, if the population is coming down, and this cultural influence may come down.
No, I agree. Again, this is a question of fertility rate. There is enough literature again, for example, why the fertility come down, why in what context the fertility will come down. Again, that is linked with the status, education, the one she mentioned in the power of pill, in that case, in the America case, which actually had a direct connection with the age of marriage and the choice in the education institution, choice. So all of that definitely plays, population and linking with the economic structure. But what you see, when this is the problem with the economics in the sense, when you have this kind of question, the range of factors plays in explaining. So everybody wants to have one factor which is important, but I think we need to think of that and link how you add up all of this and see the picture in aggregate. That's exactly, I think, contribution or perhaps appreciation that one should have for Professor Goldin's work. She can confine herself with the set of factors, moved beyond that and look at the other, which otherwise economists don't do, particularly looking at after. Perhaps that actually is the way to respond to that question. Yeah.
Is there any method of in terms of methodology discriminating the cultural impacts and the economic impacts?
Yes, very much. It's a lot of decomposition analysis people do. For instance, wage income. Let's take the wage income, assuming there's tons of exercise now, very sophisticated exercise come. Two rates, which I suggest. One is the Kalaiyarasan, the one who got a impossibility theory on the Nobel Prize. It's one of the important figure in economic history, particularly the Nobel of Nobels. He has this paper called statistical discrimination, which people then translated later into what statistically called as the decomposition analysis, where what typically is simple in one line, if there is a wage income, the differences between the men and women of the wages of the salary, how do you explain that? Then you run a, bring the set of factors, the number of years education, working condition, which region you come from, range of factors, and they call as a explainable.
Something similar to control the.
It's the control. They call as explainable factors. Then there is something called residual, non-explainable factors. But non-explainable factors can be called as potentially a source of risk. Again, unless you explain, you have both factors, then it's also said as problem. So if you explain them, that would be one way of identifying, so quantifying, deducting the discrimination, and controlling the range of results.
When is the short
on logical models, all that. But there is a way to do it. Because people have evolved methods to. She does a method. In her book, she does that explaining. And one of the reasons she says the explainable variable, basically education and the experience or the number of years experience, all of that actually helped reduce the gender wages, but the discrimination component still persists. That is one of the claims of the Goldin's work. And she says that is actually that work continues to persist the gender gap within the same occupation, which is despite that's what America's achievement. The other claim that there's a clear gender disparity in the wages even for the same occupation. And for that again there is a explanation as to number of hours as mentioned, other conditions that working conditions which are again not gender neutral in that sense. All facilitate, all explains that. There's a method to work, which is broadly the big frame is this, that there are supply distribution. That's where we are going detail more how that operates. But there is a method to quantify this gap, which is called decomposition problem.
Your questions are over.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Well, we have a similar thank you. Sincere thanks and great thanks to Kalaiyarasan, Dr. Kalaiyarasan. It's a wonderful lecture. And I also thank all the